I'd been working the night shift at the gas station for almost a year. At this point, it's not the best job, but it pays my cheap bills. The hours are long and the work is repetitive. I thought many times about quitting and finding work somewhere else, and this incident was my breaking point. It was a typical night at the gas station. I had just finished cleaning off the pumps and restocking the shelves when I saw the headlights of a car pulling into the lot. It was an old beat-up car with tinted windows. As the car pulled up to the pump, I could see that there was only one person inside. He got out and started walking up to the door. It was a man, probably in his mid-30s. He had dark hair and was wearing a black leather jacket and looked like he hadn't slept in days. I greeted him with a smile and asked him if he needed any help. He didn't say anything, but just threw a 20 on the counter and went back out to fill up his tank. It was a bit rude, but that's normal when working at a gas station, especially late at night when nobody wants to talk. I watched out the window as he filled up his tank, but a couple of minutes passed and he was still there with the pump in his car. I knew he only put $20 in, so he had to have finished a while ago. I waited another couple minutes, then I opened the door and started to say something, asking if he needed any help, but he just got back in his car and drove away. I blew it off and went back inside the store, but as the night wore on, I started to feel like something was off. I don't know how else to describe the feeling. Nobody else was pulling in to get gas, and it was really quiet outside. Then I heard a noise coming from the back of the store. It sounded like a box falling off a shelf. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way to the back of the store. As I turned the corner, there was a man standing there going through our inventory. He was tall and skinny and looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I froze in fear, not sure what to do. The man turned and saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Then he started to walk towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. I backed away, slowly putting my hands up as if to not mean any harm. But he kept coming towards me. I could smell alcohol in his breath, and I knew that he was dangerous. "Money. Where is it?" he said, slurring his words. I saw in one of his hands he had a switchblade, and with him being clearly drunk, I was really scared. I pointed toward the register and he pushed me back to the counter. As I was opening the till, the man wandered around the store, making his way to the liquor section. He stashed a few expensive bottles in his backpack, then came back to the register. I put all the bills we had on the counter. Being barely over. A man looked at it, then looked at me. "The fuck is this?" "I need more, man." He wasn't satisfied, but there was no more money to give. He flipped open his blade, waving it around and yelling at me. I was sure he was going to jump the counter and beat me to death, but then he suddenly swiped the cash and bolted out the door. My heart was pounding as I looked out the window, seeing that same beat-up car from earlier. The man got inside and they drove off. The police came a few minutes later, responding to the emergency button I pressed while the man was browsing the booze, but they weren't too helpful right away. Thankfully though, the cameras outside the building were able to pull a license plate from the car, and 4 days later I was informed that both men were caught. Apparently they were homeless and had stolen the car. They then went on a crime spree, robbing as many stores as they could, mostly just of alcohol and money. I feel pretty lucky to have made it unharmed because their erratic behavior sent one worker to the hospital after an encounter with them. A couple weeks later though, I quit my job and moved to work in the day shift somewhere else. I've worked at a graveyard for the past 15 years, most of those years being the typical graveyard shift, which was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. In my mind, working overnight had way more benefits than working during the day. Day workers had more to do, since more people would be visiting the yard. There would also be burials taking place a few times a week that need to be arranged. And above everything else, night shift gets paid an extra $2 an hour. I've seen a lot during my years working night shift, though mostly teens messing around, or the occasional drunk group of friends daring each other to walk through the yard. However, this night was different. I got to the small faculty building a bit early to chat with the day worker, and once he left, I did all of the normal checks and precautions at the beginning of my shift. Afterwards, my only job is really just to drive around in a golf cart every so often and just make sure nothing's going on. I'd say I only encounter something once a month, or maybe even every other month. Anyway, the first few hours were normal. I drove around several times, then went back to the small faculty building to eat my lunch. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I went back out to do another round of the yard. As I got to the far end, I saw something by the fence. It was obviously really dark, so I couldn't see much more than the general shape of a figure standing there. I drove up closer. I could tell now that it was a man standing on the outside of the fence looking toward me. I didn't want to confront him if I didn't have to, so I turned and drove in a small loop around the lot to see if he would try to hop the fence while I was gone. But when I got back, after 30 seconds, he was gone. I scanned the area briefly to make sure he didn't sneak in, but it all looked clear, so I continued with my patrol. Going through the whole yard takes about 15 minutes, but sometimes I'd go slower just to pass the time. I went all the way around and decided to check back on the spot where I saw the man. I really didn't have anything better to do anyways. I started driving down there, and almost immediately I spotted the man again. He was inside the yard, standing on the gravel path. I drove up closer again, but the man didn't move. I exited the golf cart and started walking up to him. He looked like a 40-year-old man. I stopped just a few feet away from him. "Sir, you can't be in here. I need to escort you out," I said, but he didn't even turn his head to look at me. After a second, a slight rush of fear went through me. "Sir, I need you to come with me." I reached out my hand gently to tap his shoulder. As soon as I did, he whipped his head around to look at me. He just stared into my eyes. He looked full of rage. I took my hand away and the man turned around and started walking away. I got back in my golf cart, preparing to call the police. As I watched him go all the way down to the fence, he stepped over it and continued walking away. I was relieved, but still terrified. I drove straight back to the faculty building and went inside. It was a small, single-room security-type building, but I felt a lot safer and calmer inside. I sat down and caught my breath. In all my years, I'd never really been scared, because it was always just people messing around. But this was different. I waited inside for a while. I'm not sure how long, until I heard a bang on the door. I jumped out of my chair and stared at the door in fear. A few seconds later, they banged on the door again. These were aggressive knocks, not those of someone friendly. I had nowhere to go. I picked up the desk phone and called 911. I didn't know what they wanted or why they were here, but I wasn't going to risk it all to find out. After probably 3 minutes of them banging on the door, I heard them walk away. I still waited for the police to arrive before I opened the door. The following day, my manager was able to pull the CCTV security footage from the building. What I saw was horrifying. Just minutes after I entered the building, the man I'd seen in the yard earlier walked up to the door. He stood there silently for nearly 15 minutes before he banged on the door. He was also holding something in his hand, but the footage wasn't detailed enough to make out the object. It was likely a small pipe or bat of some sort. The man was never identified, but I still worked the same job at the graveyard and haven't seen him since. I'm a receptionist at a local hotel and most of my shifts are overnight. I'm in charge of the front desk and my main responsibilities are to check in guests, answer phone calls and keep an eye on the security cameras. It's usually a pretty quiet job since our hotel isn't the biggest or busiest. This night, the hotel was mostly empty. There were only a few guests staying with us. I was sitting at the front desk on my phone when I saw a man start walking towards the doors outside. I stood up and greeted him when he came inside. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said, "I need a room for the night." He was definitely high on something, but regardless, I checked him in and gave him a key to his room. It was standard to allow walk-in bookings when the hotel was less than 75% full. He started walking toward the elevators and I sat back down and pulled my phone out. A few hours later, I was sitting at the front desk when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was a thump sound, like a door trying to be forced open. I got up and walked around the corner to the end of the hallway. The man I checked in a few hours ago was standing there trying to open up one of our maintenance doors. "Can I help you find something?" I asked. He looked over at me with those creepy eyes. I asked again, but he just stared at me. I wasn't really sure what to think. Maybe he was really high and looking for the vending machine or something. I don't know. I didn't want to anger the man though, so I went back to my desk and forgot about it. A good amount of time passed with no activity, no sounds from any of the rooms, nobody entering the building or walking through the halls. It was around 3 in the morning and I did a small walk around the bottom floor just to keep myself awake and busy. As I got to the hallway by the front desk, though, I heard a very sudden loud banging coming from one of the rooms. I stopped and listened for a moment, then went up the stairs to the second floor, where I thought it came from. It was very quiet now, which made me somewhat nervous. I walked down the hall, hearing nothing, but when I reached the end, one of the room's doors was open. I listened again for a second before lightly knocking. Nobody responded. I cautiously peeked inside, unsure of what to expect. It seemed empty. I wasn't comfortable walking all the way inside, though, so I couldn't really look around, but I was sure nobody was inside. I closed the door and looked at the room. Number 12. That was the room I'd given to the man. I never saw him exit the building, though. I quickly walked back down to the front desk. I looked at all the security cameras we had in the lobby and outside the building, but the man didn't turn up. I jumped. It was the hotel phone. One of the rooms was calling. I picked it up. "Hello, how can I help you?" There was a woman on the line telling me about some man knocking on her door in the middle of the night. I apologized and assured her I would take care of it. I hung up and took a deep breath. I was getting really nervous now. I walked around the desk, but then again, the phone started ringing. It was someone else from a different room, this time saying he had the same experience as the other woman. Someone knocking at his door in the middle of the night. I called the police right away. I stood by the front doors until they arrived, just in case I needed a quick escape. Luckily, they came before anything happened, but they didn't find the man. Instead, they found a broken window in his room where he likely jumped out of. It was on the second story though, so I'm not sure how he managed to get away without some major injuries. Later, while the police were still searching, they got a report that the car he used to pay for the room was stolen. It's unclear what the man intended to do or why he was knocking on people's doors. I'm thankful none of them opened their doors, though, because this case could have been much worse if they had. In late October, I was enjoying a ridge walk in England's Peak District. The high ridge overlooked Lime Park with its hall where Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice novel was filmed in the 1990s. Only a few fellow walkers had passed by in the last 3 hours or so, and also a lone jogger going my way. It's nice to share the ridge and comment on the view or just exchange nods. Now 2 figures approached about half a mile distant, their outline catching the low sun, which was highlighting the hilltop, while the valley slopes gathered the evening gloom, losing sight of them as the path dipped. I knew we would meet as it wound around the hillside and straightened again. So imagine my surprise to see an empty trail stretching away. The valley sides looked blank, without movement, and a high, dry stone wall bordered the other side, though this may hold the answer. So finding a ledge, I hoisted myself to peek over, only to see open moorland towards the country lane and a closed-down hotel. For them to be out of sight would have required the speed of a greyhound. There seemed only one way that these hikers could have disappeared, and that was to have done a quick turnaround and run like the wind. Even then, they would only just have reached the bend before I would disappear. But why? Both needing to use nature's bathroom at the same time was unlikely, so perhaps a more sinister motive was their intent. From the distance, the outlines were of two males who would clock me as a solitary walker on this quiet track, knowing it would lead me to them. Might they be waiting just out of view, setting up an ambush? Instinct advised me to skirt around by dropping down the hillside, but my pride did not permit. I picked up several odd-sized stones from the wall and carried on slowly, all the while focusing on a spot from where they may be. Should a face be peeking, then my apprehension would surely spiral and be confirmed. My ears pierced the evening stillness while I kept glancing down the hillside for a quick exit. A distant dog's bark came. Any dog now would be welcome, if only to be a distraction. About 20 yards off the bend I paused. This should still allow enough distance for a swift run. Although the strangers were obviously fleet on foot, it was likely that they must have realized by now that I was wary of them for having taken so long on the path and would make a move out of curiosity or impatience. But something made me move the falling light. I didn't fancy being up here in the dark wondering who was waiting for me. Keeping to the track's edge, my foot dislodged a chunk of gravel, though hardly making a sound. Was this enough to have alerted my perceived tormentors? I waited, gripping the sweaty stones and chucking one at the wall. The noise was disturbing in the quietness but provoked no reaction. Within 3 strides I was committed to the bend, my nervous energy now drained and replaced with calmness and a sense of detachment to face whoever may be there. The lifeless ridge stretched away into the gloom, mocking my fear, and relief came. This was followed by a weird feeling of being a victim of some sort of hoax. An annoyance too of having spent so much time and caution to cover only a few hundred yards. Without this delay I'd have reached the road home. By now I realized my fear was not entirely rational, though it remained a mystery where and how. They disappeared in a couple of minutes. This ridge had no caves or hidden gullies, just open moorland. And if they fled, what was their reason? The valley's darkness was reaching higher onto the hill, although the sky was clear, and this was better than being in the woodland with disquieting night sounds. With my pace unhindered now, I arrived at about the spot where the strangers were last seen and must have seen me. Looking back to my previous position, I noticed a wayward marker there not seen before. Then realized why this was not a post but another solitary walker who, despite my vigilance, had reached the trail behind me and was gradually merging with the horizon's creamy glow as it walked away. This was odd, as to climb part way in the approaching darkness only to turn back really did not make sense unless the failing light was the reason. By now I'd had enough puzzling and of being up here. So I started jogging for about a mile along the descending path behind me. The outline of the hill was featureless and sharp against the night sky. A part of a relaxing walk had been disturbed, leaving me pondering whether these figures were somehow connected, and them to me. These unanswered thoughts continued as I gained the road and completed the end. I've since returned to the ridge at an earlier time of day, though without any unusual sightings or clues to resolve my experience. Perhaps repeating the hike some late evening around dusk might offer up more. However, you may make your own judgment when I postpone this until in the company of a trusted dog. I'm a 32-year-old female, but at the time of this incident I was 26, and back then I would go for a jog a few times a week. My sleep schedule was pretty strange back then, so I would run late at night for work. I was a server and bartender, so I would often work late on the weekends. Therefore, throughout the week I would be up until 3 or 4 a.m., since that's what my body was used to. I'll have to admit, though, that I really did enjoy the tranquility of the city in the middle of the night. The empty sidewalk and deserted roads made for a great running track. There was a large park near my apartment where I would often go. It had a paved path and a large grassy section on one side. There was a small forested area on the other side. It was long, probably a few miles from end to end. There were several playgrounds scattered throughout the vast area. I would usually run there from my apartment, then I would go all the way from end to end, then turn around and come back the way I came. Although I did enjoy the routine, I'll have to admit that it did feel creepy at times. There's something unsettling about the night in general. Something about the darkness creeps most people out to some extent. I would guess that it stems from our fear of the unknown. Anything could be out there, covered by a shroud of darkness. I was running through the park one night at around midnight. The dim row of lamp posts provided hardly enough light for me to see the dark path ahead of me. It was a night like any other until I started to get a strange feeling. A feeling like someone was watching me. I figured it was all in my head, though, because I'd run this route many times in the past and nothing had happened yet. Also, this was not the first time I'd had this feeling. I still felt the need to be cautious, though. About halfway through the park, I saw someone else ahead on the path. This was unusual, but not unheard of. I would occasionally see other joggers out on the path. It would be a little scary to see them from the distance, because everyone looks like some dark, sinister figure until you get close enough to see that it's just another person. This one, however, gave me a bad feeling. Even as I got closer, I could tell that it was a man, probably 6 foot tall, with ripped jeans and a dark hoodie. What really struck me as I got closer was that he wasn't jogging. He wasn't even moving, actually, just standing there. I kept running closer, hoping it was nothing to worry about. When I was about 20 or 30 feet away, however, I started feeling seriously creeped out. He was standing in the middle of the path, facing me. He showed no sign that he was planning to move and let me pass. Not wanting him to know that I was scared, I stopped and jogged on the spot for 10 or 15 seconds. Then nonchalantly turned around and started running back the way I came. After about 20 seconds, I looked back. The guy was running after me, and fast. I was normally a strong runner, but I had pulled a muscle in my leg a week or so before, so I was taking it easy and not as fast as usual. Therefore, I had no confidence that I could outrun him. He was only 40 or 50 foot behind me, and I needed to make a decision fast. Without giving it much thought, I darted into the forest. At the side of the path, I could hardly see anything. Tripping over logs and branches, I made my way deeper into the dark wooded bush. Looking back to where I came from, I could see the dark outline of the man standing on the edge of the path in front of a lamp post. Seeing him there dispelled any doubt I might have had about his intentions. He didn't say anything. I stopped running and hid behind a tree. Not that I needed to hide. The darkness would have been enough. Then I quickly dialed 911. The man must have heard me talking to the 911 operator because he took off running soon after. I told them my story and they encouraged me to file a report. However, they did tell me that it was unlikely that anything would come of it, especially since I was not able to give a decent description of this guy's appearance. Apart from his clothes, I never really got a clear look at his face. As time would reveal, the officers were right and the guy was never caught. It was one of the scariest nights of my life, and I'm thankful to have survived. This happened when I was around 14 or 15. I grew up in the suburbs of a major city. My neighborhood used to be a forest. Before they put all the houses in, they left some patches of undisturbed forests throughout the neighborhood. There were hiking paths through most of them, and I would often cut through on my way home from school or from friends' houses. One night I was over at my friend Josh's place. We had a little get-together with a few of my other friends. We spent the evening watching TV and talking about whatever, just an average night. By the time I decided to head home, it was almost midnight. That was not a big deal because our neighborhood was really safe. I think I had only seen about 2 or 3 police cars around there my whole life. It would be about a 25-minute walk, so I would usually run in order to save time. I set off after saying goodbye to Josh and some of the other guys who were there with us. Other than 2 or 3 cars, the place was pretty much empty. the street lights were bright enough that I never really felt vulnerable, although I could have made it all the way home on the lit streets. There was a shortcut through one of those patches of forest that I mentioned before. It was dark, but I had my phone with me and I would sometimes use the light to get through the woods in the dark. I cut through there all the time in the light, so I had it pretty much memorized. Anyway, I would be in and out in 5 minutes, so I figured it was no big deal. I entered the woods and started running, holding my phone up with my right arm. I couldn't see anything of the well-worn path that I was following. I was about halfway through when I heard something rustling about 20 or 30 feet to my left. It sounded too big to be an animal. There was nothing larger than a raccoon in these woods. Besides, I'm pretty sure that it sounded human. That was strange, but not a big deal. I thought some of the other neighborhood kids would use that spot to smoke cigarettes or do whatever. I was curious, though. I decided to check it out, so I stopped running and started walking through the rugged bush. I took big high steps, crushing piles of sticks and dead leaves along the way. I must have been making a lot of noise myself. All of a sudden, I heard the distinct sound of a person running through the bush. Someone was there. The sound of his footsteps were fading, so I knew he was running away from me. A relief, I guess. I was still curious though, so I continued to the spot where I thought I had heard the original noise. After another 10 steps or so, I reached a small clearing. When the light from my phone hit the open space, I almost lost my breath. There was a shovel laying on the forest floor and a small hole dug in the ground beside it. Next to the hole was a black garbage bag, maybe a quarter of the way filled. It was tied up with a knot about halfway up. I quickly turned back the way I came, and as soon as I made it back to the path, I burst into a full sprint. I barged into my house and woke my parents. After I told them what I'd seen, they called the police. For some reason, they didn't consider it an emergency, and they did not investigate until the following day. I guess it's not technically a crime to dig a hole in the woods at night, but I thought the circumstances were incredibly suspicious. The next day I did return with the police, and not surprisingly, the bag was gone and the hole was filled. Therefore, there was really nothing we could do. Although I can't be sure that the contents of that bag were anything sinister, it's hard to imagine what else it could be. I kept an eye on the news afterwards and never heard anything about a crime in the area. I thought it might be someone from the city trying to get rid of evidence, but that doesn't make any sense either. There were more remote places to bury evidence where it would be less likely to be found. If I had to guess, one of my neighbors had a horrible secret. I may never know who it was or what exactly was in the bag, but there was someone among us who was up to no good. Perhaps the scariest part about it was that he might have seen me. At some point, everyone imagines being famous in their lives. A lot of people create this image in their head that being in the public eye creates for nothing but a fairy tale life. But that's far from the truth. Being under the spotlight in any capacity comes with a lot of drawbacks, one of which being stalkers and overly obsessed fans. One extreme case of this, an ex-radio host and DJ who was centered in Los Angeles, had a long, seemingly never-ending chain of emails from an obsessed fan. It started around 2005 or 2006, when the DJ started noticing a regular listener, someone who listened to the show every day and would call in on the request line from time to time. At one point, the listener won a prize from the show, and in order to deliver the prize, the DJ requested her email. And that's where things began. In order to be polite and cordial with the girl, he would answer all of her emails, and when Facebook started to become popular, he edited her back where she commonly liked and commented on his posts. This went on for a while, until one day the fan professed her love for him. The DJ rejected this advance in the most polite way he could. She seemingly accepted the rejection, and the DJ thought it would be the end of it. But it wasn't. In 2011, She emailed him a link to a blog that she was writing where she would post about him and their quote-unquote love multiple times per day. She followed him over to a new radio station and was religiously listening to his shows, assigning meaning to the musical playlist. For example, the song Marry Me by Train was popular at the time, and whenever that song would play on his show, she would blog about it actually being a marriage proposal from the DJ. She began saving all his photos from his social media and photos of other women in his life, like friends and girlfriends, and posting them to her blog with extremely hateful words. She'd make posts raging about him being a man whore, followed by another post not even 10 minutes later in a completely different tone, apologetic and soft, implying she may have bipolar tendencies. The DJ did his best to ignore it, even though by this point he was extremely creeped out. But as she again began emailing him, he tried more forcefully this time to get her to stop. But she wouldn't stop. The DJ started sending DMCA requests to her blog host from the photos of his that she had posted. The repeated violations got her blog shut down, but then she started emailing him. Instead of posting blogs, he made a filter folder so he never would have to see them, aside from occasionally peeking at the insanity in the folder from time to time. Just out of curiosity, years went by and he hadn't answered any of her emails after 2 of them, when he very adamantly told her to stop all communications and leave him alone. This continued for years, and in total she has sent him over 4,000 emails, all of which he's archived. The more recent emails have gotten very dark and violent in tone. In one of the most recent ones, she was threatening to find and hurt the DJ and happily go to jail for it. In another one, she listed the specific neighborhood in which he lived, which he worries she may have his address if she already knew what town he lives in. In an effort to stem the flow of information, he deleted all his social media accounts a while back, but she would still email him pictures he appeared in from his friends who had public profiles, as well as radio station photos that he appeared in. Most disturbingly, she sent the DJ photos of a shrine she had made of him in her home with framed photos of his social media that she had posted up on the walls, desks, etc. Being a DJ, his appearance schedule must remain public so she could technically find him working at nightclubs anytime she wants to. And understandably, he's freaked out and worried about his safety. After calling multiple attorneys, none seemed very interested in helping him with this matter due to his fear of facing the girl in real life or even being in the same room as her. He never went through with filing a restraining order. He also worried that on the off chance she didn't have his home address, the legal process would reveal it to her. To my knowledge, there was never any follow-up with this, and it's not known if the harassment continued or what route the DJ pursued, if any. But this is one of those extreme cases of how a fan's obsession could have a very negative effect on someone's well-being and mental health. If you ever check your spam folder in your email, there's a chance at one point you received an email with one of your passwords in the title, and inside the email would be threats of leaking your information, or worse, unless you paid a certain ransom, usually in Bitcoin. This usually happens when a hacker, or even often a regular user, will likely find this info by merely searching any of the numerous data breach databases available on criminal forums. In March of 2019, a 25-year-old man named Joe Albanese received a similar email to what was just described. It was titled his password that he used for every account that he had. This was obviously a cause for alarm, so he opened it immediately to read the contents of the email. This is what it said. Hey, Joe, all you really need to know is that I know your password and other personal information. I won't come after you, I won't harm you, as long as you send me a small amount of money, $5,000 in the form of Bitcoin. We're going to refer to it as a donation for a good cause, not as any kind of blackmail. My Bitcoin address is if you don't send me the money, bad things may happen. Don't even bother going to the police. This email is untraceable. Joe did some research and learned that these kinds of threatening emails are common scams and usually nothing will come of them. Still, Joe replied to the email asking, "What other personal information of mine do you currently possess? I'd love to know." He sent this as a sort of challenge to the email, not even really expecting a response or for it to even go through, but it did, and he promptly received a response back saying, I know your home address is EV. If you go to the police, I will know about it and you will be sorry. This is when worry would really set in with just about anyone, as having a password leaked in a data breach is one thing, but some unknown person having your home address threatening you with it is completely next level. Joe didn't reply to the email for several days, but he also didn't go to the police. He decided to wait it out and see what would happen next. And after 3 days, there was a follow-up email saying, I'm still waiting for the payment, I won't wait much longer. Joe replied this time saying, I'm not paying you $5,000. If you want to come to my house, you'll get a face full of lead. This was a complete bluff, though, as he doesn't actually own a gun, and the hacker likely knew that, because that same night, Joe received a follow-up email containing a picture of his house. It was the side of his parents' house and zoomed in on his bedroom window upstairs. He didn't want to tell his parents, in fear of worrying them, but now that his gun bluff didn't work, he knew he may have to get them or the police involved. He responded one more time, saying, I don't have $5,000. I'm broke, paying off student loans. The house you sent a picture of is my parents' house. They did nothing wrong. If you need to do this, please do it to someone else. I don't have the money to send you even if I wanted to. There was no response this time, but within an hour, the sound of glass shattering from downstairs traveled throughout the house. Everyone, including his parents, heard it. There was one of their decorative bricks from the front of the house, laying in the dining room among thousands of tiny shards of glass from the broken window. Joe tried to explain the situation as quickly as he could, and while he and his dad took a quick look outside for anyone who could be out there, his mother called the police. Joe showed the police officers the emails and everything, which were forwarded to the police department. A police officer stayed parked outside the Albany's house for a couple of hours that night. Joe blocked the email address from sending any further emails, and as far as he knew, he was never contacted again. The police had a hard time tracing back the original source of the email, as it was sent from an untraceable device, likely an iPod Touch or similar device. Christian has a friend named Katie who was out for a job interview. They used to be co-workers, which is how they met. Nothing was out of the ordinary until Christian started to try and contact Katie after her interview was supposed to be done, only to find that his texts weren't delivering and calls were going straight to voicemail. It was very possible that her phone could have been off or she had no cell service. But as hours passed and still nothing was delivering, he started to get concerned. The most likely and obvious possibility was that she lost or broke her phone. But finally, hours later, the text said, delivered. However, Kate never replied. That same day, as Christian was checking his email, he saw an email from Katie's old work email. He opened it, and it read, Hey, I lost my phone and keys. Can you come pick me up and by some old warehouse construction-looking building in the parking lot across from a Hyatt Place? Christian asked when she last had her phone and if she had any idea how she lost it. She replied, I have no idea. Just come soon, please. It's cold. The address that she then sent to better help Christian get to her said it was 20 minutes away. But looking at the location of the address on the map, it led to some abandoned-looking warehouse parking lot, evident by the green growing in the parking lot and decaying-looking rooftop. Christian sent another email back demanding she go to a less sketchy pickup point. She took a few minutes to answer back with, I'm already sitting on a bench here. I'm comfortable. Just please hurry. Christian got in his car and started following the directions to the location he was told to go. But about halfway there, he stopped the car when he had a thought, and that was, how is she using her laptop to email him in the middle of some random parking lot by an abandoned warehouse? While it was maybe possible that there was some free Optimum Wi-Fi nearby or something, it did seem very unlikely. This is where Christian became suspicious of the whole thing, and the fact that she was using her laptop to contact him instead of going to the hotel across the street and calling him just made it seem more suspicious. He tried calling her number a few times, and now it was ringing. Instead of going to voicemail on his third try, the phone rang twice, and somebody picked up for a second. Though most likely on accident. By this point, Christian was suspicious. All of Katie's things were stolen. He called Katie's brother to tell him about the situation and ask his opinion, but when he asked first thing, "Have you heard from Katie?" Katie's brother said she had been home for 2 hours and that her entire backpack and phone were stolen. Christian yelled into the phone that he was being led into some sketchy parking lot at that very moment by someone who was on Katie's email, most likely on her laptop. Christian drove to Katie's house immediately to pick the two of them up, and they called her phone and left a voicemail with all three of them yelling threats of what they'd do if they didn't return the phone and laptop, which probably went unheard if the thief didn't have her passcode. They also sent a number of texts which went unresponded to after calling the police and requesting assistance in the parking lot. A police car did show up, but the entire parking lot was abandoned as expected, and no further emails were received. Kate's phone was never turned on again. It was likely disposed of. She never got any of her stuff back. But on the bright side, Christian may have avoided being lured into some kind of trap that would have led to him being robbed or harmed. Back when I worked at Old Navy, I was on the processing team that typically worked the closing and night shift. That way we could make sure all of the shelves are neatly stocked up when the store opened in the morning. This was an amazing job and really wasn't that difficult. The store I worked at had all the pallets delivered before we even arrived. So we would just break down the boxes, sort and fold the clothes that had just been dropped off, and then made sure to fill out the shelves and change out whatever sales and markdowns that we were doing. And on the easier days, we even got to listen to our music. As long as it wasn't disruptive. Everyone I worked with was pretty cool too. So all in all, I love that job. But that's also where I had one of the craziest experiences I'll probably ever have. You see, I was working one evening and it was right before closing, so we still had a few people shopping in the store. I was spending a lot of my time in the back room doing an inventory and getting the carts filled with products that needed to hit the shelves. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary at first, but that took a turn really quickly. The store that I was working at happened to be across from a relatively small jewelry store, and unbeknownst to me and the people in the Old Navy, the store had just been robbed. It was probably around 8:30 at night when I heard the sound of a woman screaming from the front of the store, which of course caused me to drop what I was working on and begin to rush out of the storeroom. I was stopped, however, by a man who had been fleeing from the robbery and was clearly carrying a firearm. Everything happened so fast, I couldn't tell if it was a handgun or some sort of mini-automatic SMG of sorts. As soon as I saw the weapon in their hand, I froze. Luckily for me, the man just pushed me to the side as he continued to run through the back room. I ran out into the front of the store where everyone had already been in the process of evacuating, and once we were all out, I closed the front door and locked it, and we all waited patiently for the police to arrive. The response time of the officers was impressive, but by the time they arrived and made their way through the store, the man who had terrorized us was nowhere to be found. After speaking to one of the officers, it turned out that he robbed the jewelry store alone and in the process, actually shot one of the employees. It was at that moment I realized how lucky I was that when I came face to face with the gunman, I didn't meet the same fate. It took about an hour and a half for the police to fully check the store to a point where they were comfortably saying that the man had left the premises presumably through the back door. By that time, the store was ready to be closed up and the entire processing team was given the night off after the incident. Since none of us really wanted to be there at that moment, we finished cleaning the store really quick and then locked up before all of us headed home. Over the next couple of days, we had a few follow-up visits from the police who wanted to see our security footage, but other than that, there had been no sign of the man responsible, at least not for a couple of months. It was around the middle of June when we noticed that our AC unit wasn't functioning as well as it used to, and after making a few calls, we had an HVAC contractor come and take a look at it, and it wasn't long before she found the problem. We notified the police of what she found right away, and they were at the store in no time, along with paramedics. It turned out that the robber never made it out of the store. He must have found a way to squeeze into the air ducts and try to hide out, However, he must have tried to go forward at one point while inside and ended up going into a duct that led straight down. Now, this duggle wasn't wide enough for him to turn his body, and he was in a position where he couldn't wedge himself back out of the duct the way that he came in. It's unclear how long it took, but the man ended up being stuck upside down in the duct, which likely caused him agonizing pain and discomfort until he ultimately passed away. The police recovered the body along with nearly $25,000 worth of jewelry in his pockets. One of the scariest moments of my life came just a few months before my 17th birthday. I was 16 years old and had just gotten my driver's license at the beginning of that summer, which meant that when I wasn't working my part-time job at McDonald's, I was usually driving around with my friends and family. As the summer came to an end, my mom asked a favor of me, which I happily accepted. She had asked me if I would take my younger sister to the local strip mall to get some clothes and supplies for the upcoming school year, and as I said, this wasn't an issue at all. I told my sister Mary that I would take her to get what she needed, and if she was good in the store, we could grab some ice cream afterward from my favorite stand. So when the time came, she was more than excited. We left our house around 4:30 in the afternoon, and the mall was only about a 25 miles drive, so we were there in no time, and to our surprise, finding a parking spot was quite easy as the lot was rather empty. Mary and I got out of my car and we started our trip by heading to the Target that was across the parking lot from the mall and picked up a couple notebooks and all of the required writing supplies for her. It was strange though, as we made our way through the store I couldn't help but feel like someone had been following us. This caused me to periodically look over my shoulder as me and my younger sister made our way up and down the aisle, and in my opinion I didn't see anything that would be considered out of the ordinary. There were a few other shoppers in the store, but other than that I didn't notice anything suspicious. I tried my best to remain calm and brush the strange feeling away so that I didn't concern Mary, but I sure was happy when we finished up in Target. We then made our way over to the Kohl's that was located in the strip mall to look for some new clothes for Mary. I told her that she could get anything that she wanted, so right away we began looking at some light-up shoes and other clothes that I too would have loved when I was a child. Honestly, back to school. Shopping with her that day would have been so much fun had I not continued to get that feeling. It hit me like a freight train, but as Mary tried on some clothes in the changing room, I again couldn't help but feel as if someone had been stalking me. This time I decided to call my mom and let her know that I was feeling a bit odd and wondered if I could head home with Mary after this. My mom understood the concern, but instead of telling me to cut the shopping trip short, she decided to come to the mall and finish up herself. She asked me to wait there and she would be there soon. I reluctantly agreed, but knowing her schedule, this was probably the only time that we would have been able to get Mary clothes and such, so it was the best option at the time, or so we thought. After finishing up in Kohl's, Mary still needed a few things and wanted to run by the Gap outlet store that was in the same plaza, so I texted my mom and told her to meet us there instead, and I cautiously walked my sister over to Gap with my head on a swivel the entire way. There was still no sign of anyone though the fact that it had begun to get dark out didn't make things any less stressful. The two of us went into Gap and began looking at some sweatshirts and jackets that were in a pretty good sale, and about 5 minutes after getting into the store, my mom texted me to let me know that she was pulling into the parking lot. I let Mary know that our mom was there, and she was so excited that she wanted to go outside and meet her. So I grabbed her hand and we made our way out of the store quickly. And as I made my way through the automated sliding doors, I was knocked to the ground. 3 men had swarmed the entrance of the store and began hitting me with a hail of fists and kicks as I dropped to the floor. That was when I heard Mary scream. I looked up and saw her in the arms of one of my attackers, who was now dragging my little sister away from me through the parking lot. She began to cry and flail about, but there was nothing I could do. As I was still being pummeled by 2 of the men, I thought I had lost her. That was when I heard 2 voices yelling, one of which I knew as my mother, who must have seen what was happening and was rushing to help. The other I didn't recognize. To my surprise, another man who had been shopping inside Gap saw what happened and ran out to assist us. He was followed by 3 employees who had been working at the time, and when the men saw all of the people coming to assist, they quickly gave up on their attack and ran off. The man who had taken my sister had dropped her. When it became too hard for him to get into the vehicle, she ran straight to my mother, who then ran to me, and law enforcement was on site within minutes. The 3 men who came after us that day were never apprehended or charged, at least not to our knowledge. When I was in my 20s, I was living in New York, about 40 minutes away from New York City. This was great because at the time I had actually been working in the city and would spend a lot of my time there, and the train ride to commute home really wasn't bad at all. All in all, I loved the city. But I would say that before I left, it seemed like every day it was getting more and more dangerous just to be walking around. And believe me when I tell you that no one is safe from it. It was the middle of April, and I'd just gotten off work and had to run some errands before heading home. So I found myself walking around the city, just hitting up a few stores that were only a block or 2 from the office, and after a long day at work, I figured that it wouldn't hurt to grab a small bite to eat and a beer before heading home. It was Friday, after all, so I did just that. I went into one of the bars that I enjoyed eating at every now and then, and the sign referred to the bar as a tavern, which I thought was awesome, and I ordered some mozzarella sticks, fries, and a drink. By the time I finished my meal, it was around 7:30 at night, and I figured I should probably head back home before things got too crazy. If you know New York City, you'll know that on the weekends it can get super packed with people. On my way to the subway that would bring me to the train transfer station, though I ended up having to use the bathroom, I looked around and saw a small outlet store and decided to run in and ask if they had a restroom. I was surprised to see the store was practically empty. There seemed to be a single employee working, and they were busy putting clothes away when they saw me. They must have known I needed to use the bathroom by the expression on my face, because he just gestured toward a door in the back, which I presumed was the restroom. I was right, and I walked in and I noticed a single stall and a urinal. I ran over to the urinal and began to relieve myself when out of nowhere I heard the door of the stall throw itself open, and before I could even zip my pants up, I could feel a gun being pressed into my back. The man told me not to move and that this would be quick, and then began running his hands through my pockets. He grabbed my wallet, my personal cell phone, and my work cell phone. It was at that moment that I truly began to freak out, and the man must not have liked me fidgeting around, because out of nowhere a loud popping noise went off and all I could hear was a ringing in my ear. I had been shot. I dropped to my knees. I hadn't noticed the pain yet, but I could feel the heat coming out of the wound in my back. I attempted to pivot my body in order to face my attacker, but at that moment I heard the sound of 2 more gunshots. My vision began to fade and soon everything was black. I remember waking up to the employee putting pressure on my wound and panicking, telling me that help was coming. I managed to hold on until the paramedics arrived on the scene, and thankfully I walked away from the incident with only a bit of physical therapy required. Following my recovery, the police pulled the footage of the man exiting the store quickly after shooting me. It's believed the only reason he didn't get the employee on his way out was that he was hiding behind the shelf stocking clothes. The man who mugged me was arrested 2 months later following another robbery that he attempted in the same area. I never saw any of the stuff that he took from me again, though, but I suppose it could have been much worse.